Okay, well, hey, hi, how are you? Usual greeting. Let me just turn down background sound here. Yeah, there we go. Looks a bit better. Yeah, I'll turn down completely. There we go. Anyway, welcome tonight, or today, depending on where you are. If you're down under like my buddy Dan, or across Canada, like my other buddy Dave, who I'm usually talking on this thing and he's going to sleep. But yeah, welcome. Looking forward to this live stream, this episode, because I want to dive a bit deeper into something that was a brainchild of mine about a decade ago when I was asked to revise hazard assessments for an organization I was working for. And it was difficult. Like they absolutely had a very convoluted system to begin with. And on my way home on the bus in the evening, and good evening, Dan, or good day. And on my bus ride in the morning, I redesigned this whole entire process, got to work and threw it all together. And I've since shared it. I shared it when I was there. I shared it with other organizations. And since I've left, I've shared it with other groups. But I think it works well for what I'm going to talk about tonight. So anyway, let's without further ado, let's jump into it. And we're going to talk about hazard identification, assessment, and control. Episode 6. And it's the formal hazard assessment, but it's tweaked and jacked. Now, something just as an aside, as a thought, it's been raining for most of May so far here in Alberta. And I've noticed that climate change is sort of halted now because we're not getting the forest fires. I wonder. Anyway, I wonder how many folks, though, working outside are adjusting their hazard assessments to include the rain. Now, it's often a debate as to whether the weather, I don't know how that came out, but whether the weather or not is really a hazard. Should it be considered a hazard? Or on the other side of the coin, if you're not considering it as a hazard, are you considering it as a contributor to the hazards? We all know that rain, snow can cause slipping and tripping hazards for sure, amongst other things. And often you have to implement controls for the weather. So hence, it should be considered at minimum a contributor to existing hazards, or something that's making existing hazards worse, or a hazard itself. Let me know what you think in the comments. I want to know. I want to know what you think about hazards as far as weather goes. Yeah. So anyway, moving right along. Let's talk about the chat rules. Okay, so participate. Introductions are nice. Not a lot of people online at the moment, and my fault. I'm sorry. I honestly have been very busy, and I'll talk about that in a sec. So not a lot of leeway and lead time for this stream, and I apologize for that. I'll try to get better at that. Anyway, introduce yourself, where you're from, what you do, etc. Introductions are nice. Ask and answer. Your knowledge and opinions count. I want to hear from you, especially if you're in different areas, under different jurisdictions, etc. It's good to compare notes. And a lot of times that's how best practices emerge, is from collaboration. And that's what this channel is about. Please be civil. No name calling, no insults. Not everybody emerged from the womb knowing health and safety. In the same token, a lot of times people might ask a question. You might not think it's a wise question, but none the same, it's a question. So we should answer and be civil about it. And last and foremost is it's not professional advice or an official formal class. There's no certificate at the end. We will have a few questions, but I'll save that for in a bit. So anyway, a few other things to think about here. I know that some of you might be getting this for the first time, and the format seems a bit relaxed or weird or not like a normal YouTube video. So yeah, let's talk about that right now. the process and what you can expect. So always going to recap the previous episodes. That's one thing I'm going to do, because if you're taking a course, usually what would happen is you'd start off with the first few minutes of the class, just recapping where you are up to that point. So it just makes sense. There will be a presentation, a lecture, hopefully anywhere from 20 minutes to a half an hour, depends. Depends on the depth of the material, and it also depends on how many questions I get asked. Because if there's questions in the chat, I'll be more than willing to answer them. And of course, there's going to be a short quiz at the end. Had those 2 points mixed up, I apologize. And then, of course, the video will be viewed afterwards. So if there's comment questions, I'll answer them in subsequent episodes. And if the live stream series is finished and people are catching them, just as an FYI, I always try to answer every comment that I get. I'll talk about those in a sec. So anyway, quick recap. So what we've done is we've talked about what is a hazard. We've defined it. There's lots of definitions. Importantly, have you defined it in your safety management system, especially within your hazard identification, assessment, and control program? We talked about categorizing hazards with proper identification. It makes it easier if we can, as far as proper identification goes, it makes it easier if we can classify and categorize hazards. Because without proper identification, we likely won't implement the correct controls, right? We've gone over risk, hazard, and consequence. They're different. It's important to know the difference. Often people look at consequence as the hazard. Yes, one might cut themselves handling broken glass, but it's not the broken glass. It's not the fact that you cut yourself. It's the fact that you were exposed to sharp edges. That's the hazard. Just as an example, if you want to see more, go over previous episodes. But we talked about quantifying risk, actually giving risk a numerical value. To either the hazards themselves or the hazards and the risk, or even the whole gamut of hazard, risk, and controls, which we're going to explore in this video about giving the controls quantification and numerical value and how that affects the end assessment. And finally, of course, we talked about applying hazard and risk controls. Oh, pardon me. Also, we put it together into a formal hazard assessment. As I've said before, doing that hazard assessment, identifying and assessing hazards for risk, is the foundational element of health and safety. And then applying the appropriate controls so work can continue unabated, there you go, and safely, so that people will not get injured. And then everything else, your safety programs are the direction and guidance around achieving that end. That's basically it. So the question that often gets asked is, actually, let's just go back for just a sec. When we're talking about applying hazard controls, if we're applying them and we're not, and one of the common misconceptions around this course is the idea of elimination. And I've had a few private messages come by regarding, well, if you eliminate, well, that's true. If you eliminate, you don't have to assess that hazard. Because you've eliminated it. However, if you substitute it, that's different. And often the mistake that people make is they put elimination and substitution together, and they're not. Because if you substitute the hazard for a less hazardous situation, whether it be a less hazardous process, a less hazardous chemical, whatever the case may be, you still need to assess it. And then through the workflow, assess your controls, and then apply your hierarchy of controls, which is going to be your engineering, administrative, and PPE. So understanding that if we apply controls, how much have we actually reduced the hazard? That's the important question, and we're going to answer it tonight. So anyway, and I know you're likely asking yourself, And I imagine there's plenty of employers that might watch this and go, what's this guy talking about? Now he wants to make it more complicated. It's already taking time. Doesn't more advanced just make it more complicated? And I can understand that. And by all means, it likely does. However, we have to understand that the hazard assessment is a procedure designed to identify, assess, and manage health risks and safety hazards in the workplace. So when we're doing that, we've identified, we've assessed, and then we apply that risk quantification. Have we reduced that hazard enough? Or is it still too hazard that we need to consider that task and the workflow and maybe change that whole paradigm? And that's why we want to make it more complicated. Maybe that's a wrong term to use. Maybe that I shouldn't have said it that way, but that's why it might need to become more complicated, especially when we get into more advanced and high-risk things. Like say when you're looking at working at extreme heights, like 30, 40 stories above the ground, or if you're entering a confined space for a significant amount of time and doing other tasks while in that confined space or at that extreme height, then it comes time to look at, have we lowered that risk enough? We need to consider that, what if we were to make this, and think about this, what if we were to make this an organizational fit than just one about the health and safety department? Make it big, make it across the organization. And that's part of the goal of this whole entire process. Dan asked a question once about a risk matrix, and we'll talk a bit about that. Sort of another animal when you come to the hazard assessment. But what if you're able to take and start making your decisions based on the data around hazard and risk? Make the decision to move forward or make the decision to move something up a notch in the project schedule, something to that effect. And often, hazard assessments done right and expanded can provide you the ability to do that. So, let's just think about something for a sec here. It's great that we're quantifying risk and it removes any guesswork and opinion. But is that where it stops? Can we quantify the controls a bit better to help us analyze the risk around certain tasks and maybe help us refine our workflows, which I've been talking about? And one of the things I've found with organizations that do have both high-risk, high-consequence activities, they really need to take a look at that further. But even going through this process in depth, it can cause a good awareness to happen where people start thinking, gee, should I move that lift up into an area that I can't really see? Should I walk that area first? Should I start looking for hazards first? The question I often get also is, how often should these formal hazard assessments be reviewed? And the first obvious answer is, what does your local OHS authority say? And whatever they say, go with that, unless, of course, you want to exceed that for whatever reasons, like best practices, or it might fit into this second category. And like if they don't stipulate it, there's other triggers to consider. Like one, has your organization undergone significant changes like expansion, mass hiring, lots of new equipment, or there's market changes that have occurred that might spur on change that you anticipate? Okay? Because really and truthfully, hazard assessments, hazard identification and assessment is part of good planning. It should be part of project management. Often it's not. I wish I had $100 for every time I've been a part of a significant project and I've had to go clean up accidents and we've delayed things and investigations, all because, well, they didn't consult the safety guys first. I once had, how should I put this? A peckerhead for a boss who in turn said to the project manager, well, if you just got Kevin involved and give him enough money, he could solve all your problems. No, but we were already a few weeks behind because of a couple of different accidents that halted work and needed to be investigated. But hey, go ahead, spout off like an idiot dork. Sorry, venting. Anyway, getting onto it, another best practice is annually. It's a good bet unless work groups are very static with little change or the collective hazard risk is very low. Once again, this also reinforces the need to consider quantifying your risk. Now, I also know that that sounds like a big ask. I know it does. However, I've mentioned this several times as safety professionals. We shouldn't be doing safety alone. It should involve the internal responsibility system, and many hands make for lighter work. So first off, number one, workers familiar with the tasks should be involved, as should your safety committee. Any management should be involved as well that's going to be resourcing any of the controls that need to be applied. So consider who would be best involved and start sharing that work around. Once again, a good thing to do is leverage that safety committee. Make them work for their gratuities that you give them for showing up for the meetings. Anyway, enough talking on my part. So similar but different. So if you look at this, we have picking up from the previous episode, similar to the other hazard assessments, but this one goes a bit different. It identifies the generic task, in this case mopping floors, and then breaks it down into critical steps. Getting supplies from the closet, mixing the water and cleaner in the bucket, soak and wring the mop the floor. All of these are tasks that require actions. Now, do you have to do that? No, I explained that in previous episodes. If you want to go further and start looking and drilling down into why you might be having accidents, and yes, down the line, I'm likely going to make a video on what's called a hazard assessment cheat sheet. So stay tuned for that. But the other thing, of course, the step of repeat. I guess it's debatable if repeat needs to be listed, but you get the idea behind that. Now, everything is similar to before. Hazards identified, then exposure, and in this case we got we got excessive force when lifting, contact with chemicals, awkward postures, overexertion, all of these things that can lead to a consequence. Remember, hazards lead to a consequence. They aren't the consequence. And then, of course, noting it and quantifying it based on the exposure, frequency, and severity. All quantified end up with total risk, but maybe let's look at it as subtotal risk. Okay? Stick with me. Stick with me. I know that might be weird, but I'll get on with it in a second. So now the next thing we want to do is look at the controls. Now, things are a bit different here. This is where we stray from what we did last episode. In this case now, the controls have a value. Engineering is 3, administrative is 2, and PPE is 1. Obviously, if you're substituting, you're going to do a whole new hazard assessment on that substitution, right? Got the idea? And once again, like I said before, comment. Let me know your thoughts. If you don't agree with how I'm doing things, I want to hear why. Anyway, as you can see too, the controls are each only scored once. Like we have a bucket-mounted wringer, automated mixing station for chemicals. These are hazard or engineering controls. You don't get multiple values. And the reason is, the idea is there's always going to be risk. But so if you were able to layer multiple controls and then give them multiple values, you'd end up with a negative. And there's there is negative risk, a whole different conversation and a different application. But this is not a case where you want to do that. You want to just give them that single score. And so as we see, what's happened is basically we have the original hazard was noted as a 7 for the value, for the subtotal risk, we'll call it. And then what we've done is we've added up the controls, and we have 3 for engineering, 2 for administrative, and 1 for PPE. And so it gives total controls as a 6. So the adjustment now, we're down to 1. So we have a low risk in mopping floors with that. Okay. But as we see, when we go to using glass cleaner, it moves up to a bit of a different risk because we don't have any engineering controls available. Okay, we have written instructions on the use of PPE, written instructions for the proper method to prevent MSIs. Because before, in the previous slide, I'll go back to it, It was noted that skin contact with chemicals, awkward postures, and repetitive movements were the hazards that were noted. So in going to this slide again, we see that we have written instructions for PPE use, written instructions for the proper method to prevent PPE or MSIs, and of course, safety glasses and gloves. There's no engineering controls available. So because there's no ability to put a barrier between the hazard and the worker, with the exception of PPE, we have more of a hazard. Okay? So understanding, and of course, if we look at the original hazard score, because it's the exposure is increased, there's more repetition that it's being done than versus mopping floors. Obviously, there's more mirrors and more glass to be cleaned. So in that's how, once again, we're drilling down and we're identifying in a better way true risk. Now, when we get down to it, you always have to have numbers. And so here's the numbers that I've used and how I determine both the frequency and exposure. Now, of course, annually, it describes whether the activities occur annually, but less frequently than monthly. Okay? So if it's 2 or 3 times a year, then it's annually, right? 3 times a year. But if it's monthly, these are tasks that activities occur monthly, but less frequently, first day with the new lips, less frequently than every week. And then finally, 3 is weekly, which the tasks occur during the week, but less frequently than every day. And then daily tasks are 4. So what happens is the frequency, the more often you're doing it, the value goes up. And the same with exposure. It helps to predict probability better, because if we're only doing it 1 to 6 times in that given period, so we're only doing it 1 to 6 times a day, we have less probability than if we're doing that task 20 or more times in that given period. Now, if I've made that complicated, please let me know in the chat or the comments. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Now, I also I'm more than willing to share this. It's an Excel spreadsheet. That's nothing more. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and I've even had groups take and plug it into a data management system that they've used, or a software piece or whatever. If anybody wants it, let me know in the comments. Not in the chat, because I'll forget about it. But put it in the comments, and then I will put the link in the description. Okay? So anyway, that's the process for determining the frequency that I use. It gets a bit more granular. Like I said, yes, it's a daunting task the first time you do it, but if you do it right the first time, it's almost like that idea of measure twice and cut once, right? Now, this is where things get cranked up a bit. And I'm sorry if this is really small for folks or whatever. There's a lot of information, and I didn't want to go through 4 slides because I wanted to keep it all together. It makes more sense. There's more content or context if it's together. But when we're assessing risk, we got to start looking at it in a holistic manner. If we want to be better than that average bear, if we want to be that best practice group, then what we've got to do is look at the people impacts, the property and equipment impacts, the business disruption impacts, and the environmental impacts. Yes, people always get the attention. Worker killed at certain accident will get more than roof collapses, nobody injured. In fact, that will get very little news time, little attention, whatever. Worker killed gets news bites for weeks. Okay? So in this case, so once again, we look at the severity, the people, property, equipment impacts, etc. So if we look at it, once again, scoring, and just using the people first off, we got minor injury and requires first aid only. So returning to work. Okay? 2 is as a medical treatment or care where they've had to see the doctor get treatment, or a treatment facility, get treatment, but they can return back to work. 3 is we got a serious injury that's going to require modified work. They've lost time and there's significant absence from work as a result. So once again, describing it a bit better. And then finally is extreme. It's that life-altering or life-ending process. We either got a fatality or significant personal permanent disability. In other words, it's life-altering. They're not going to return in their previous capacity. Okay? And then if we look at property or equipment impacts, minor damage, and all of these are monetary. So once again, if you decide you want to download this or ask me for it, you would switch this and these values to your current corporate risk tolerance. In other words, how much can you handle? How much can you handle losing? In this case, I've got minor damage to equipment, total less than $10,000. Now, to some organizations, that would be absolutely crippling, like a small group, let's say a small business of 15 people. $10,000, depending on the situation, especially in today's economy, I mean, especially in Canada when we got a wingnut for a leader, but that could be crippling. So that might be down to 1,000, depending on your scenario. Moderate damage to equipment, total loss between $10,000 and $50,000. I think that's what I have. Yeah. And then we got like major damage to equipment, total loss between 50 and 150. And then critical, we got major damages or complete loss to equipment. But then the next thing to look at is business disruption and impacts. And this is and then once again, give it a monetary value. Don't say, oh, we had to close down for 2 days. What does 2 days mean? Look at it as okay, I'm just getting things back up running here, so just give me a sec. We had a computer crash. If folks are still there, yeah, I got like the blue screen of death, so just give me just one more second here. Just move the mic out of the way so I can see. Just bear with me. Okay. There we go. I think I'm back to normal. Yeah, mine was misbehaving, Dan. I got the blue screen of death. I don't know, like, it just blurped out. I got that said, don't worry, we're collecting information. I don't care about the information. I just actually want to know that it's working. That's all. Yeah. Anyway, so where was I? I was talking about business disruption impacts. And that's the important thing to think about. Like, and don't look at it as a day. What are your disruptions? And think about what you do and your end result and your goal, and what is your main market value? What is your main reason for being as a business? And then you can start understanding how much you're going to lose. Like I was saying, well, I shut down for 2 days. Figure out how much you normally make in a day, and then it'll give you that value. Plus, don't forget, you're likely paying wages on that as well. So if you lose and you're still paying wages, then increases that loss. So anyway, something to think about as far as risk management goes. And then, of course, your environmental impacts. And that's something important to think about. Like, if you have incidental, like an incidental release, which there's very little effect, insignificant effects on your property, you have, you can clean it up and it's not a reportable based on your jurisdiction. That's a 1. But if you're going to have a release onto your property with offsite impact or known consequences, or you're going to have to report it and pay to have it cleaned up, or put aside resources to clean it up, then you know what? You're going to have to bump it up a notch. It's going to become a 2. But then you can crank it up to a 3 if what you're handling, the chemicals you're handling, or this process that you've got, if it has a release, it's going to have detrimental effects. And it's going to require outside agencies, police, fire, hazmat units, definite reporting. And there's sometimes in some jurisdictions where you have a release and it's an automatic fine. It's an automatic punitive action regardless, okay? Or if you've had them before and you've reached that threshold where your authority having jurisdiction says next time, well, then you know. And then, of course, a 4 is a release with offsite impact with known detrimental effects, requires ongoing cleanup. And I've dealt with environmental issues where, and it's required, I've had to call in outside agencies and everything. And what was established is a 10-year testing and monitoring process. So, once again, so when we keep in mind, this all lends to a better look at your total risk, and it gives you a better idea to start quantifying it and so like I said at the beginning, making this an organizational thing. You can use this process just to also for assessing workflows, okay? And then Dan's going to get all smiley and happy over this. You can also, now I just grabbed this off the internet, so I didn't bother I was really busy, so I apologize. But you can take those same totals that you have and start popping them in. And use, and depending if you're doing it on a score of 1 to 4, you can use with the idea of your probability and severity, plug it into a risk matrix. Yes, matrices. And you know what? As far as matrices go, they're endless. You need to base them on your workflow and your workplace circumstances. Don't grab one off the internet and just assume that it's going to work. Check it out and run your workflow through it to make sure it's going to work. If not, you're doing it all for naught. It's no different than brand new safety professionals, brand new, without much experience. They will want to design cookie cutter processes that they can transplant into the different companies that they consult for. And after likely about 3 weeks or less, they quickly discover this doesn't work worth a crap. Because health and safety is not a cookie cutter approach. It's a personalized approach that is also based on continuous improvement, okay? When we adopt things like hazard assessments and risk matrices, we have to realize that once again, we have a whole model with numbers, but they're subject to our organization and our workflows, which change over time. And because our dynamics of our workplace change over time, so should our approach to hazard assessment and control. Really? If you disagree, please, by all means, let me know. I want to hear from you. It's okay to be wrong. I don't mind if I'm wrong. I would rather get corrected. Kind of think I'm right, but either way. Also, if you're just catching this for the first time and you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button. You know what? Every subscriber counts, and if you watch a few videos, it actually puts a couple of bucks in my pocket. But once again, like I said before, hazard assessment is not a one and done. Continuous improvement is what drives a successful hazard identification, assessment, and control program. We can't just assume that once we've done something, that's good enough. Okay? Because nothing is ever truly good enough. I mean, here, let's put it this way. If you went to a doctor or another medical professional, whether it's a chiropractor, dentist, or whatever, and you have to go for several appointments, do you want to hear, oh, good enough at the end of every one of them? Right? Just a thought. Anyway, I didn't think this one would be very long because we've built up upon it, and the next stream likely won't be very long either. It's going to talk about different applications of different hazard assessments. So let's have a quiz, shall we? Okay. I've also been using these for short form videos, and I don't know if anybody's appreciated them or not, but if you thought they were valuable and a good idea, by all means, let me know. I appreciate it. Also, too, steal and use them in your training processes. Hi, Chris. Welcome. But use them in your training processes. I encourage it because you know what? When it all comes down to it, yes, I make a little bit of money, very little bit of money off of YouTube. It should likely take me 32 years to pay for the gear that I've invested in. Don't tell Wei G. But anyway, on with it. How often should formal hazard assessments be reviewed? So is it A, depends on the legislation, B, annually, or C, whenever there is a significant operational change, or D, all of the above? And the answer is all of the above. Now, mind you, the best practice approach is going to be doing whichever one occurs at a more frequent interval, right? I've had groups ask me, well, how often should I do inspections? What do your hazard assessments say? What do you mean? I want to know how often I have to do inspections. Do your hazard assessments say that you work in a higher risk environment, you have higher risk hazards and high consequence risk? If so, then you should be doing inspections more often. How's that for an answer? Yeah. So here we are. The next one. Can the weather be considered a hazard? A, nope. B, yes. C, it's a contributor to hazardous situations. Or D, none of the above. And for those of you that are just catching it now, I brought up this topic earlier on in the stream. And I said, can the weather be considered a hazard? Really and truthfully, if you have to apply a control for something so work can continue safely, then that control, whatever it's controlling, should be considered a hazard. So if you have to like erect a shelter to work in the rain, then guess what? You've erected an engineering control. So, yes, the weather can be considered a hazard. Okay, I'm not saying it's a hazard every time, but it can be considered a hazard. If you don't agree, by all means, I want to hear from you. Okay? Next question. What kind of control is a warning beeper on mobile equipment? Is it A, PPE, B, engineering control, C, administrative control, or D, all of the above? So once again, what's that beeping doing? Is that beeping forming a barrier? Is that beeping something that a worker would wear? Or is that beeping influencing and guiding and directing worker behavior? So the answer is C. It's an administrative control. Okay, next question. I don't know how I ended up with that twice. But anyway, what type of hazard is exposure to very loud noise? Is it A, biological, B, chemical, C, a noise-induced hazard, or D, physical? So once again, if you want the medical explanation, you have little hairs on your eardrum. And they bend over like this. They don't straighten out. That's what helps you differentiate tones. And then your eardrum is a tympanic membrane. And when it's depressed frequently and violently, it loses its elasticity and its ability. And in some cases, it can even break. So if you're to think about it, the answer is D, physical. Next question, why is it important to correctly identify hazards? A, correct identification helps in general workflow. B, it isn't as long as they're mentioned. C, proper identification will help to ensure correct control selection. Or D, none of the above. And I've mentioned this several times and in several different videos too as well. Proper identification of hazards will help you implement the correct controls. So the answer is C. Proper identification will help to ensure correct selection. So there we go. I'll ask it now. Are there any questions? Aside from Kevin, why did your computer crash? Honestly, don't know. Really irked me, but anyway, there we go. Because it's virtually brand new. I think it's a month and a half old. It's a brand new Lenovo. It's an i9 with a beefy video card in it. Oh, who can say? Anyway, yeah. So if there's no questions, what I'm going to talk about next is different forms of hazard controls. And, different forms of hazard assessments, and of course their application, how we apply that, and why we would use different types of hazard assessments. And a lot of times people don't even realize they are doing one when they are doing it properly, depending on that hazard assessment. Yeah. So there we go. Once again, if there's questions that come in after the stream's over, I'll answer them in the subsequent live stream. And of course, if the stream series is over, I still answer all the comments I get. I appreciate those of you that came and joined, and those of you that stuck around, even though I crashed. So thank you very much. Yeah. Do me a favor. Understand one thing, that safety leadership is not a position. You don't have to be a CEO. You don't have to be a manager. You don't have to be have any title behind your name. What it is doing the right thing in the right time in the right place. And regardless of who's watching, just because they're the right reasons to do it. Leadership emerges when people do that and do that right thing. And leadership emerges when people are provoking safety and leading by example. Okay, so do that. Whether you're at work or at home, work safely and be safe. Okay? Take care. Bye for now, everyone.